Welcome back to a new edition of Believe in 49ers presented by the Believe Podcast Network and Bet Online. I am your host, Tommy Call III, and I am joined alongside Evan Giddings. And Evan, I wanted to start out this podcast because this is now the second time we are reacting to kind of a rather shocking loss to the 49ers. And I was going to blame it on you a little bit, like the Evan Giddings curse of Believe in 49ers, because when I was doing this thing solo dolo, they made it to the Super Bowl. 49er fans just out there, if you're listening, if you're going to pick a side. But then I was thinking about it. Maybe it's the both of us together, because you had your day in the sunshine last week when I was out sick. You stepped up for a big win for the 49ers against the Patriots. So I can't blame you. Maybe it's us.
I mean, it could be me. It could be the fact that there's two L's in the last name Call and the fact that there have been two bad L's in the last 3 weeks for the 40. I don't know. But what I do know, Tommy, is that even though, yes, it was a solo fun episode last week and they beat the Patriots and hooray, that win means absolutely nothing because of the absolute egg that they laid today in the second half against the Arizona Cardinals. So whether we're talking about losses, if it's your fault, if it's my fault, it's the San Francisco 49ers fault that we're having this conversation right now.
Absolutely. And before we kind of dive into another late game collapse for the San Francisco 49ers, it's our specialty at this point, Evan, here on Believe in 49ers. I have a message from our friends over at Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest. Pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of the $200K. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get in on the game of blackjack, poker, or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here. So, Evan, I just want to start with this, honestly. San Francisco 49ers, another loss, dropped to 2-3 on the season with an ugly, shocking, whatever word you want to put in front of it, loss to the Cardinals 24-23. What's your immediate reaction? Because I'm still, as we sit here, a couple hours after the game, I'm still scratching my head.
All right, let me ask you this. Do you want me to go micro or do you want me to go macro?
Let's go macro.
Macro? Okay, so macro is that the Seattle Seahawks also laid an egg in their game against the New York Giants, meaning that the Niners have now set up a toxic Thursday night tilt for first place in the NFC West if they can get that win. That's macro. And if you want me to feel optimistic about things, everything about the 49ers that I feel good about right now has to do with the teams around them. It doesn't have to do with the team itself. And that's where the micro comes into play. Because right now, this is a team without an identity, without a consistent coaching staff as far as performance is concerned, without a consistent red zone attack that was 1 of 6 today against a hapless Arizona Cardinals team that was, by the way, 25th in red zone defense coming into this game. Defensively, cannot get off the field when they need to, cannot stop the run in the second half of games. I don't want to hear that it was 110 degrees on the field because the other team played in the same temperature. And when it comes to special teams, yes, they were unfortunate that they lost their kicker today. But again, even though they got 6 points from the special teams unit, they also fell flat because, unfortunately, their kicker got knocked out of this football game. So once again, in all 3 phases, the 49ers got beaten. And once again, like 2 weeks ago, they got beaten by an inferior opponent. And that's where we're at right now. The Niners look like an inferior football team to the one we saw go to the Super Bowl last year. And that's why they're sitting at a game below 500 for now the second time in the same season for Brock Purdy.
And I want to kind of dissect just a part of the Arizona Cardinals, right? Like, this team, I think you could label them as like frisky, fun. Their offense is going to keep them in games probably they shouldn't be in. But that was through, I would say, 3 weeks. I mean, week 4, this team basically quit on the field in their home building, got absolutely blown out. Then you do have to travel and get on a plane where it looks like they quit on Jonathan Gannon. And then to mirror that, the 49ers today, I just thought it was such a coasting style experience. Like, that second half, it just seems like they kind of put on cruise control and didn't have any type of like awareness on what was happening around them. I mean, Evan, this is a team at the end of the day, like it's easy to, I think if you were being optimistic, it's easy to make a lot of excuses. You have the Super Bowl hangover. You have Christian McCaffrey being hurt. You can kind of go up and down. They're missing their kicker today. But at the end of the day, this is a team that still has Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Brock Purdy, who we know who Brock Purdy is who at this point. It's not like he's some young kid trying to figure it out. He is a good quarterback. He took them to the Super Bowl. He belongs to be judged on the standard of a contending quarterback team, however you want to define it. This isn't something we're figuring out at this point. All those guys are still in place. You have Nick Bosa on the defensive side of the football. You have Fred Warner, albeit banged up. He's still out there. I mean, all of that alone should, I think, get you over the finish line, especially, Evan, get you over the finish line when you have a 10-point lead in the game. That's really what this comes down to. You can talk about all these different excuses and what could potentially go wrong. They still had a 10-point lead in this game in the fourth quarter that they lost again, and they've been here once this season. This has happened. This isn't like an early season fluke. This has happened once already this year. Everybody on the sideline should feel that. Everybody watching it felt it. I mean, you were there. I mean, the vibe you had to be aware of it, and I think it's just an absolute egg. I mean, it's embarrassing. It's one it's a tough pill to swallow. I mean, and we're saying that for the third time through 5 weeks.
And yeah, the stadium, which I was at today, and the locker room afterwards, it was sullen, it was sweaty, and it was just downright paltry. It was lifeless, and quite frankly, it should be. Like, they should not feel good about what they've done over the first 5 weeks of this football season if they are the team that they purport themselves to be, which is one that wants to play in the final game. And I always love listening to Fred Warner. I love listening to Brock Purdy because, in my opinion, those are the two most stable pieces of this current team. And those are the two that have held this team most accountable, I believe. And the thing that I continue to come back to is this is not last season. That doesn't mean the Niners season is over. It doesn't mean they're destined to miss the playoffs. But what it means is that this is a very different group, even though it has similar pieces. They're playing less than they did last year, even though they have all pros littered all over the place. They're coaching worse than they did last year. Kyle Shanahan is not pressing the right buttons at the right times, whether it's in the red zone, whether it's on fourth down decision-making. Obviously, his job was more difficult today by the fact that Jake Moody sustained a high ankle sprain, and Nick Sorensen's defense clearly wore down over the course of this game. But again, that all happened to the Arizona Cardinals too in regards to stamina, being drained. They were on the far sideline. You know, for people that aren't super familiar with Levi's Stadium, the way that it's built is so that the sun bears down on the opposing sidelines. The shade hit the 49ers for the final 3 quarters of this football game. So you got not just 100 degrees on the field, the hottest in the history of the stadium. You probably are playing in 110-degree heat on that sideline if you're the Arizona Cardinals. So temperature drove both of these teams mad today, and the Cardinals were still the one with enough juice at the end to just give the ball to James Conner again and again and again. And the Cardinals did to the 49ers what the 49ers have done to the majority of the NFL, I would say the better part of the last 3 to 4 years, which is just lean on them and just take their hearts away. Because even though I didn't still, until the final kick, feel like the 49ers were going to lose this football game, it was a here we go again moment that I felt during the Rams game, and that it feels like is going to linger until they prove us wrong.
We write a lot about this team, and you're looking for your storylines, and I had the idea, at least, and some of the stuff written out, that this was the game they closed, right? Coffee is for closers. We needed to see a win like that.
Yeah, they had decaf.
And you talked about, the 49ers kind of ability to lean on teams, and kind of with that and kind of blending that into the idea of closing, there's one play, right, that you can kind of define a game by. And kind of my next question for you is, who does this loss fall on? Is there a moment? Is there a player? Is there somebody you're pointing the finger at? And I think back to like this game specifically, and even late, like you had mentioned, it would felt like a shocker that they would lose this game, an absolute surprise. And when they're driving late, leading into the Jordan Mason fumble, you go, okay, maybe it's Jordan Mason is the guy that's going to be the closer. And that big play, right, that you're used to the 49ers making to close out a game, to kind of put the final stamp on it, where you think maybe Jordan Mason cracks one in and runs into the end zone. The Cardinals were on the other side of it, and you talk about the heat and the wear and tear and all these different things. The Cardinals are the one that punches that football out and gets that big break, that big spring. Right then and there, it felt like, oh my gosh, like it's going to happen again. And sure enough, Evan, it did. That play alone, it just, that drive kind of, I feel like, encapsulated, because I mean, it was asleep at the wheel for the second half. No points for an offense that has all these studs on it, all these big time playmakers that are getting paid tons and tons of money. And they looked decent against a team that is inferior to them. And finally, it seemed like they had a little bit of life on that late drive, and it was all to be taken away with one swipe of the hand and one, great fumble punch out. Evan, that's where it lies to me, but I don't know what you're thinking in terms of like, where does this loss fall? Are you pointing the finger in the strict of this game, week 5? What are you looking at and going, that went wrong?
Well, as much as I'd love to just single it down to one play, yeah, I can't fully blame J.P. Mason, who, by the way, is in his first season as a full-time starter, hasn't put the ball on the turf all that often in his career. I can't blame him for making a mistake at a critical point, because at the same time, and it was all across the broadcast, all you got to do is stop the Cardinals from running the football and you don't lose this game. But they couldn't do it. So if you're going to ask me where I'm looking, it might sound like a bailout answer. This is a complete team failure from the top to the bottom. You don't lose a 13-point lead in the second half against an inferior opponent the way that the Niners did, unless you can't beat them offensively, like they could not score touchdowns 1 of 6 times today. And I realized that they didn't have their kicker. However, that doesn't explain why you, with all of these all pros and all of these pro bowlers, cannot get into the end zone inside of the 20-yard line. That's the first part. Defensively, can we put a hand on a running back? Like, can we get some pressure on Kyler Murray? I mean, in the first half, outside of the first drive, which only lasted 2 plays for the Cardinals, I thought the defense looked pretty good. But again, similar to the Rams collapse, they wore down over the course of this game. And I'm again not pointing at the weather or the temperature or the stamina, because the Niners controlled the ball more than the Cardinals did. That defense was not on the field as long as the Cardinals were. So the defense just got leaned on and got beat on by a Cardinals team in a rushing offense. That is not bad, but certainly not one of the top tier groups in the NFL. And then thirdly, on special teams, I realized that they lost Jake Moody, and that sucks. They also made a great play with Jordan Elliott blocking a field goal. And of course, Deommodore Lenoir, shout out to his 25th birthday, taking that ball to the crib. But I also have to wonder why Jake Moody was in the first place in a position to make a tackle. Because if your special teams unit is in good coverage, if your guys are getting to a kick returner, or if you're kicking the ball through the back of the end zone, we're not in that situation in the first place. Obviously, that's nitpicking. My larger point being, in all 3 phases, they failed. Kyle Shanahan has not had the greatest coaching start to his career, most certainly. And for that reason, we talked about against the Rams being 7.5-point favorites. Today, they were 7-point favorites. The last time that they lost at full strength, as a 7-point favorite at home, was week 1 of 2020 against Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals. So I don't know what it is about this football team that brings out the worst in the Niners at times, but generally over the course of the last 4 seasons, they have closed these deals. And now, once again, they're behind the 8 ball early in the season, wrapping up the cupcake part of their schedule, and now they got to go play the big boys. And they have not shown me so far, Tommy, through 5 weeks, that they deserve to be on the same field with those big boys, those elite players right now in the NFC, and quite frankly, around the NFL.
Yeah, and I know you're indicating, at least to an extent, that Chiefs matchup is looming, and I think every 49er
Dude,
fan,
I'm worried about Thursday night in Seattle, and they just lost to the Giants.
Yeah. I want to. You brought up a point about the defense and stopping James Conner, and I mean, Evan, this guy looked like Larry Zonka over there, just running through arm tackle after arm tackle. And I understand, like, we've kind of beat to a pulp the idea, like, it was very hot in the Bay Area, but this is football. It wasn't a surprise, right? We've been dealing with this all week, and I just don't that's not something you've seen from the 49ers, even under Kyle Shanahan's tenure when, Robert Saleh started out here as defensive coordinator and the defense didn't do that well. You didn't see kind of arm tackles and just running. I mean, I think it could have been any James Conner's very, I think, underrated just NFL football player.
Agreed.
But I mean, it could have been anybody back there because it was just, I don't know if it's just talking about a lack of effort, but it just, to me, like this idea of them just kind of being on cruise control, kind of thinking up they were probably cinching up a win is what it felt like to me. And I don't know if it is, they've been to the playoffs, they've been to the Super Bowl, and kind of leading to my next question. And I have some questions specifically for you about this game, but while we're kind of talking about it, I think a conversation I saw on social media after the game was just this idea of the Super Bowl hangover. And is that just becoming kind of a just lame excuse at this point? Or is that something you seriously consider? Because if there was a Super Bowl, if there was a hangover game in general, you point to this one, you obviously point to the Rams game. Um, or is it just regression? Is this team stepping back? Because you mentioned it best, and you've mentioned it a couple of times. I think it's a really good point to kind of stick on. This is a different team from last year. This isn't last year. But you want to bring up whenever there is a loss and you're looking for something to blame or to point the finger, you bring up that idea of Super Bowl hangover. Is that fair at this point, or do 49er fans and just that kind of narrative overall just need to go?
Well, and this is something that myself and Lorenzo Neal on the kickoff show on 95.7 The Game discussed. This idea of what has happened to the Niners, right? Because right now, they seem to be pretty wholesome compared to last season. Obviously, they're missing McCaffrey. Dre Greenlaw's gone. Talanoa Hufanga exited this football game, leaving a couple of young safeties on the back end. But for the most part, they're pretty much the same group, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're different, in my opinion. I think mostly because, and I think the Cardinals' loss today drove this point home. Nobody is scared of the San Francisco 49ers anymore.
Wow.
No one looks at them as the team that are the hunters. They are now the hunted. And there is a lot of scarlet red blood in the water right now. And whether it's the Cardinals, whether it's the Rams, whether it's the Minnesota Vikings, who are a legitimate team, whether it's the Seattle Seahawks next week, everyone believes that they're in the game against the Niners. Whereas last year, especially, anytime the Niners went up double digits, that game was over. There's a reason why the Niners were labeled front runners. It's because they never gave up leads. The only games that they lost last season was when they fell behind early and Brock Purdy had to play from behind. When they played from ahead, credit to Kyle Shanahan last year, they took teams away. In the playoffs, they had to come from behind. And then against the Chiefs, it was a little bit of a different story. But overall, this team has shut the door and been the team with coffee, closers, over the course of 365 days. That's not the same case anymore. And for the Super Bowl hangover, I mean, me and you, Tommy, would like to enjoy the occasional libation. You get after it a couple nights, and then the
I'll have
next
a pop
day,
from time to time.
exactly. I'll have one after we finish recording this episode. But to the point where even if you're getting after it, the next morning, you're feeling a little bit groggy. You're not feeling like yourself. Okay, 2 days later, even if you really got after it, you might be still feeling a little bit, mentally not fuzzy up top. 3 days later, 4 days later, you got to be 100%. Like, I'm sorry, get some electrolyte in you, get a swift kick in the ass, hit the gym, do something, because the Niners are now heading into week 6. Whatever Super Bowl hangover you believe is there, that's got to be done with. Get some Advil, Toradol. I don't know what kind of drug you put in your system to get it out, but you got to figure this thing out. And the Niners have not been able to do it.
And I kind of think about, it's weird. We went through a transition here in the Bay Area with the Golden State Warriors becoming a team that I think you bring up a really good point about going from the hunter to the hunted. And we saw that with the Golden State Warriors, but NBA is so different because the NBA is driven by its young stars. We're in a state of where these guys, they're very in tune with social media. They want to kind of go at guys like Steph Curry and stuff like that. Evan, I don't know. I don't know if it's different in the NFL, right? It's a lot of the same guys that you're playing against, right? And these are teams that we've kind of been most critical about. The 49ers are these divisional opponents that they've gone up against and laid eggs against. And so that, to me, it's like, how do you solve that? How do you, do you go and blow out the Seattle Seahawks on national television in a primetime slot on Thursday Night Football this week? Yeah, you'd hope, but I mean, we haven't really seen them do that yet this year outside of that New York game in week 1, which feels more like an outlier at this point than kind of a picture of what this team is. And I don't know what kind of I don't know what solves this. I don't know. Like, I don't look at it like a specific thing where you go like, okay, you gotta tackle better. I mean, is that really a solution, or is that like, because that's like, I feel like that's like you're talking about like peewee football, right? Like, like, hey, wrap up. This is the NFL, so I don't think that's necessarily like a box to check. You're expected to wrap up and tackle at this thing. So I kind of throw that one out, and then you go like, oh, their inability to close, right? And you look at in the NBA, to make the comparison again, you look at like closing lineups and different things and kind of time of possession and these different things that kind of translate to victories in the NBA. Well, in the NFL, it's like, are you not running the ball good enough? Well, the 49ers run the football pretty well. Is Brock Purdy turning the football over? I mean, yeah, he did today twice, but I mean, those were tipped balls and kind of like fluky-ish turnovers, still turnovers, let alone. So I can't put my thumb on it, because I think you bring up a great point about the idea of, the hunter and hunted, kind of looping back into that. But I don't understand. I don't know what the fix is. I don't know what the key to is. If you were to ask me if I start, I just would say I don't know, because it's looked funky. It's looked weird. It's in. You want to say it's not a team from last year? Yeah, it looks like a completely different team, because we knew who they were last year at week 6, going into week 6, and there were front runners and all the things you had just mentioned. That's who they were. Like you said, I don't know what this team is, because I don't know what that solution is to fix this, because it just feels weird, to kind of put it as simple as that.
Yeah, and that's why I don't think there is a simple solution, and certainly not one that they're going to find in 3 days between now and when they got to head up to Lumen Field to play the Seahawks. That doesn't mean that they can't beat Seattle, for example, but what it means is it's going to take multiple weeks. One of the reasons why I thought this was a big game for the Niners, obviously moving above 500, that's certainly something you want. You'd like to be 500 also in the division, because now they're 0-2. You're behind the 8 ball from that point. By the way, they've already lost more games in the division than they did last year, and they've only played 2 of them. And the other part of this too was, you don't want to be underwater, right? They've now been underwater 2 times already in 5 games. They got back to treading water last week for the Patriots, but because they lost this football game, I hate to sound this way, but that win means nothing, because the Patriots are not a great football team. And even some of those things that lingered, like them going 2 of 4 in the red zone, carried over to this week against probably a better, not great, but a better Arizona Cardinals group.
And that's why, even kind of when I talked about who we know about this 49ers team, I almost skipped that Patriots game, because it's like, you're supposed to beat that team, but by any means, it wasn't some overwhelming victory where I think 49ers fans felt incredible about it, right? The win against the Jets, you're going like, we're a wagon again. Like, we just dominated Aaron Rodgers in Monday Night Football. Like, it looked great. Since that moment, it's just looked funky.
No, and the other part of this too is, right now the narrative of the Niners is being dictated by their opponents. So what I mean by that is this: you take a look at the Arizona Cardinals. They're 2-3. I don't think they're as bad, certainly, as they were last year when they were a laughing stock. But the Cardinals' 2 wins have come against now the Los Angeles Rams and the San Francisco 49ers. Now, you could say, well, they're both division opponents. Those games are kind of wonky. This is how I look at it. The Rams and the Niners, so far this season, have not proved themselves to be great football teams. The 3 teams that the Cardinals have lost to are the Buffalo Bills, the Detroit Lions, and their third opponent. I apologize for not having it off the top of my head, but I believe it was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Washington Commanders. They got blown out by the Commanders last week. All 3 of those football teams are playing really good football. So that's the other thing that's frustrating too, is, we're going to walk into the studios tomorrow and people are going to be talking nationally about what's going on with the Niners. And it's because other teams have dictated the story of their season so far for them. Yeah. And right now, based on who the Cardinals have beat and who they've lost to, the Niners right now are just flatly not a good football team. They have time to correct that, but we can only say that for so long. Like you're talking about, Tommy, you can only make so many excuses, because it's going to be week 6. And if you lose that game, well, then you're 2-4. And I hate to break it to you, you have a long week coming up, but then you got the Kansas City Chiefs. Yeah. So, and then you got the Dallas Cowboys. It's like this was the first 5 weeks of their season was the easiest portion of their schedule. And I thought they needed to be, ideally 4-1, but
Mm,
that's sometimes a lot to ask, especially for a team with the season they did last year. But 3-2 would be a great place to be. And they're 2-3. That that
mm.
that is concerning for me.
And speaking of concern, before we kind of shut the door on our immediate kind of reaction takeaway coming off the loss to the Cardinals, I want to ask you, Jake Moody, he left the game, high ankle sprain. Kyle Shanahan said, revealed to the reporters after the game. I don't know, Evan, let's just say he's probably not going to be available for Thursday Night Football against the Seattle Seahawks. What's your concern level at? Because, do they go out and get a Rodrigo Blankenship? Do they go out and kind of survey something? I mean, you have to, essentially, so that's a yes. But what's your concern level with? Because speaking to the theme of this season, these have been close games, right? Where you're going to need to lean on a kicker. And I think kicking across the NFL, if you want to talk about phases of football, is really good right now. So if you're the 49ers and you're going to have to start from the bottom and be, and that suddenly turns into a weakness, and special teams overall, that's been kind of a weakness to start the year through these first 5 weeks now. I mean, to me, that is pretty darn concerning because, like you just mentioned, the schedule is very lucky where you could probably, very tough, and you might need to lean on some luck and some convenient kicks late in games. And now you're doing that with potentially a guy off the couch.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is there are a few good options, quote unquote, off the couch. A long shot would be Robbie Gould, who I think is a high
Ooh.
school football coach somewhere.
Mm.
Well, yeah, I don't know if he wants to put the cleats back on, but that's an option. Cade York is a name I've seen thrown around, who's big time kicker in the NFL. And then also keep this under the radar. The Cardinals had to use Chad Ryland today, who made the game winning kick because Matt Prater was hurt. Chad
Mm.
Ryland might get cut this week. So the
Yeah.
guy who ended up beating the Niners might actually be playing for them in the near future. But you're right. With Jake Moody being out, probably, I don't know, at least for, I would say through the bye week, you're going to need a kicker to come in and help you out. At the very least, I think kickers have been as good as they've ever been across the
Yeah.
board. So you'd be able to find a serviceable one. But it isn't, we've found it is an important position. You need a kicker. They didn't have a kicker. If they had a kicker today, they win. And as much as Jake Moody's missed field goal against the Rams to not close that game out might give some people pause about him, he's been damn near flawless this year. Like Jake Moody
Yes.
also has not, in my opinion, big a problem, comparatively speaking, for the rest of the 49ers. So, it's just tough, Tommy, because also, this kind of game is going to wash away certain performances which were good. Like Nick Bosa had his first interception of the season. Brandon Ayuk had a breakout game and looked really good today for the first time this season. But those two particular moments or plays or players are not going to matter because all we're going to talk about tomorrow is the fact that they're below 500 again.
Yeah, I think, as good as those guys played today, and I wanted to mention Brandon Ayuk because we've been hard on him, rightfully so. Speaking to kind of like to keep that same attitude, I mean, the conversation should very much be how underwhelming the start of the San Francisco 2024 campaign has been. I mean, it is an absolute head scratcher. But the thing is 49er fans out there, we're going to keep talking about it here on Believe in 49ers with Tommy Call, Evan Giddings. We're going to be back in just a couple days to preview this Thursday night football game, a very important game. Suddenly, Evan, do we break out the must-win tag yet in week 6? Is that a little early? I'll let it fire. And a must-win Thursday night game.
Yeah, I mean, I guess personally, I reserve must wins for mathematical matchups. But you're right. It's like, how about this? Between now and when we record, I will come up with a term that is like, for example, last week, the Patriots was not a get right game. I thought that was a better get it game, a better get right game. This week would have been a get right game for the Cardinals. So like that version, I'll come up with something between now and then for the Seahawks.
Can't wait. You can hear that next time here on Believe in 49ers. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm Tommy Call. That's Evan Giddings. You can follow us both on Twitter. And thank you again to all of you for listening. And thank you to our sponsor, Bet Online.